Hey everyone, this is part 2 of our discussion with Dr. Beatrice Beebe. It picks up right where we left off in part 1. Welcome back. I know you have a clinical component to your work.
Yeah, I'm also a psychoanalyst.
And you have, in some cases, you share the videos of this, the frame-by-frame analysis of these interactions with the parents.
Yeah.
How do they react to that?
Yeah.
What are their thoughts when they see that?
Yeah. So I have a project now for creating documentary films, because research videotapes, you can't really put it into the internet. It's all protected. So I now have a new project where I'm asking mothers, would they be willing to come and interact with their babies and be part of something that would ultimately might be part of a documentary film. And in that process, what I do is I do a little bit of the mother and the baby interacting, a little bit of the me and the baby interacting as the strange partner. And then the mother and I watch what we just did, and we get videotaped watching it. So now she and I are in one camera, and the film that we're watching is in the other camera. And first I ask her, your job is we're going to go through the film in real time and frame by frame, and you're going to tell me what the baby feels, what you feel, how you think you're affecting the baby, how the baby's affecting you. And then my job is to do the same for my interaction. But when I show that to them, they say, oh my God, I can't believe this baby is noticing every little thing. I never knew that. I never knew that before.
So in other words, when they see this broken down frame by frame, they feel that they're seeing the degree to which their baby is tuned into them.
And how they're tuned into their babies.
That they had not perceived.
They hadn't been aware of.
In real time.
Yeah, they're fascinated by it.
Interesting. And is that something that you found useful in interventions?
Well, this is kind of like an educational video. This is not therapeutic,
but in the therapeutic cases, I mean, is that something, for example, if you have a depressed mother and a child,
you would do it a little differently if you have a therapy case, because you don't want to just expose the mother to the film and the tiny details of it and so on. You want to go slow. And you want to really stay with the mother's experience of the child more. And you might show a bit of film at some point, and it might be very helpful. I generally would show it in real time. I wouldn't really break it down the way I do for research, because sometimes people can feel too exposed, especially if they feel upset about themselves and their babies, and you don't want to go there. But I do show film to mothers who are interested in getting some therapy for themselves with their babies. And
do mothers feel that it helps, seeing that helps them with their relationship? And what do they say about that?
Well, I'll tell you about one wonderful mother who said, oh, I think I'm setting the pace and setting it too fast. I think maybe my mother did that with me. But you see it. We call it a shock to the unconscious. You see it, you can see some of it right in real time that you didn't really know before. You didn't realize it. You know, it's very strange to see yourself on video. We're not used to seeing ourselves that way.
Much less broken down into microseconds.
Right, but I just wouldn't do that for a therapy mother and baby. But even just showing the film in real time is a shock to the unconscious. Oh my God. I see, I'm setting the pace and I'm setting it too fast.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you entered graduate school in 1968, and half a century ago. How has our understanding of babies changed since you started school started in this field half a century ago?
So I went to graduate school knowing that I wanted to study emotional development in infants. And how I knew that is a whole other story. But I did. I knew that's what I wanted to study. And I was really discouraged from doing that. Why don't you study children? There's more happening. You know, babies is just not much happening. Children are much more interesting than babies. But fortunately, I had two wonderful mentors who were interested in studying babies, Dan Stern and Herbert Birch, and I studied babies.
So, but how would you characterize the view that people had of babies 50 years ago? How is that different now? What was it?
Yeah.
What was the view then?
Yeah.
Why did people think this did not make
Yeah.
sense to study?
Yeah. Well, 1968. So in the 60s there was a very big development in infant research, and there was a famous book published called The Competent Infant, which set the stage, I think, for studying social development. And that was really more about perceptual development and learning. But so by 1970, which is when this field of face-to-face microanalysis began, 1970 by Dan Stern, Colvin Trevarthen, and Barry Brazelton, right? Those three guys started this. By then, we knew that babies were competent. And there was tremendous excitement about looking at the social competence. But that view, even though a lot of research has been generated from that view hasn't trickled down into the general population. So even though all the research is there, most people, it's very common that my students like to tell me that the mothers and babies that they treat tell them that babies don't really know anything until a year. They don't really remember anything. They're not really that aware until a year. So that's still a common perception, right? So you would think, since I'm in psychoanalysis as well as infant research, I've been translating this research for the psychoanalysts the whole time I'm doing it with Frank Lachman, my main psychoanalysis collaborator. I think our first paper was 1988. So so the psychoanalysts know about this research, but I think the more general public doesn't.
So they don't really see babies as quite human? What do you think? What do you think the difference is?
They don't see them as so acutely aware, and emotionally sensitive and emotionally aware, and learning everything, right? Learning it. Developing the expectancy of what is it like to be with you, right?
Right.
They don't really understand that the babies are absorbing all of this, and as early as 3 to 4 months, how it goes with your key partners will affect the trajectory of your development. They don't understand that, I don't think.
Right. So along those lines, you've published your 6th book recently, but it's the first one you've written for a general audience. Right. What's the focus of that book, and why did you decide to publish a book for a general audience instead of an academic one?
Yeah, so this is called the Mother-Infant Interaction Picture Book, and my co-authors are Phyllis Cohen and Frank Lachman. And we decided to publish it. I get so many requests for my films, you know, people teaching infant development and couldn't we borrow a film? And I have to say, no, 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 I'm really sorry, because they're all protected, confidentiality protected. So I got the idea of having an artist draw some of my favorite frame-by-frame analyses of film and putting it into a book so people could see the way it goes when the mother and the baby are going up and up and up and up into these beautiful smiles, or how it goes when the mother can't tolerate the baby looking away and the mother chases the baby and the baby dodges, and what that looks like, right? And the baby ends up over here. So I thought that if I had these drawings, people would have a way of seeing the films without the films. They're not as good as the films, but they're fascinating, and they allow you to look more than you would be able to look at a film, right, which goes by pretty fast.
Right.
And so Phyllis Cohen and I spent 400 hours looking at all of these drawings and putting words to them. What do we think the baby feels? What do you think the mother feels? What's happening from here to here? It seems as if the baby's moved this way and the mother's moved that way. And seems as if the baby feels this and the mother feels that. So it was an attempt to help people see the films, and it's based on our research. So it's 10 patterns of interaction, some that predict secure attachment at a year and some that predict insecure attachment at a year. And so it's illustrating findings from the research. And I think that one of the most important things our group is doing is taking the research findings and then unpacking them back into the videos. Give us an example of videos that show this finding. I asked my statistician, okay, which dyads are they that show this? And then I go look in that dyad and I see, where is it happening? How does it work? So I'm going from the more abstract, because our research is very mathematical, right? Our research is taking these coded films, second by second coded films, and asking how does my looking and looking away affect your looking and looking away? And how does yours affect mine? Taking these abstract findings and going back into the videos and translating the human element of what is it like for this baby and this mother to be connected in this way. What does it feel like to both of them?
So in the research, you guys are really, you're really focused on a kind of a routinized coding process.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So you're not just looking at the baby's face and the mother's face and sort of imagining what they're thinking.
Right,
So in the research process, that's not what's happening.
Right.
In the research process, you
you
are
have to be
doing
reliable
very
coder
specific coding.
And one coder spends 2 years coding one thing, baby look away.
Oh, I see.
And another coder spends 2 years coding what positive to negative phases in the baby, and another coder positive to negative phases in the mother, and another coder positive to intrusive patterns of touch in the mother, and another one, the baby's self-initiated patterns of touch, et cetera, et cetera. And then we do fancy mathematics that allow you to say, does my series of behaviors predict yours, which means you're adjusting to mine, and vice versa.
I see. And so then that is what you're using to make these longer term developmental predictions.
Yeah. Or even to the effect of maternal depression.
The effect of, right.
Or anxiety.
But it's been kind of disassociated from the humanness of it.
Yeah.
And now what you're trying to do is to go back and to kind of put it back in human terms.
That's right.
And human terms that the public can public can understand.
And look at the ones that are going well, how fabulous they are, and look at the ones that are not going well. Hey, wait a minute. This is really disturbing. This baby is really in trouble. This baby is frantic. This baby is really unhappy. And the drawings show you that.
Right.
And the babies that are really unhappy, that's a different developmental trajectory from the ones that show the really more positive faces, or even a marvelous metaphor that Ed Tronick has really been using is disruption and repair. And that's a metaphor that's also in psychoanalysis. And he's shown that really the secure ones do a lot more disruption and repair. They do. Everybody has little moments of disruption.
What does disruption and repair mean?
Everybody has little moments of mismatches or glitches. Or,
so you sort of disconnect. It didn't go well.
Yeah, a moment. Mm-hmm. And then you reconnect.
I see.
The baby goes back and away and unhappy, and the mother steps back, and then they reconnect through the hands, and then they come back together, and then they're smiling again a few moments later, right? So the pairs that can repair well after the glitches just do much better. So it doesn't have to be perfect, right? So one of the ideas is it's in the mid-range that I'm following you and you're following me that seems to be optimal. And disruption repair is an optimal pattern. Mm-hmm. But these different patterns predict development across the lifespan. So they organize the baby's development.
So one of the things I think most surprising probably about your research is the way that what you have been able to observe, what you're observing at 4 months, is predicting the nature of the relationship between the baby and the mother at 1 year. And then a whole other body of research that is finding that the nature of that relationship at 1 year is predicting a whole range
Yes.
of
Absolutely.
outcomes
Yes, and that's a
through
huge
adolescence
literature.
into adulthood.
Yeah.
What kinds of things are linked from those early relationships into through the lifespan?
So the nature of the 4-month communication does predict secure and insecure attachment. It predicts brain development. It predicts empathy in childhood and adolescence. It predicts physiological regulation, how you regulate your stress and how you calm yourself down. It predicts cognition, just the 4-month interactions. The 12-month interactions, which do begin with attachment, predict forms of psychopathology in childhood, adolescence, and young adulthood. The more, some of the more disturbed patterns of insecure attachment, which is called disorganized attachment. And so the lion's share of the predictions does start at the 1-year point. And my effort was to say, okay, so much happens before 1 year. What does it really look like? How can I link these early patterns to the 1-year attachment and then connect to that literature that then is predicting so much in development? It's really the body of research that's developed by the attachment researchers that is the most impressive for lifespan predictions.
So the really kind of shocking takeaway is that by watching 2.5 minutes of video of a mother and a baby, when the baby is 120 days old, you're able to observe things that predict the nature of that relationship at a year, which in turn predicts substantial outcomes for decades subsequently.
Yeah, a couple decades, yeah.
So you've done a project specifically looking 30 years later at the infant-mother pairs you observed at 4 months.
Right.
And what are you finding?
Yeah. So that's a project I'm doing with Miriam and Howard Steele and Carl and Lyons-Ruth. So they're my collaborators in that project. And we're mostly predicting to the adult attachment interview, which is something that Miriam Steele is very interested in and is the main person looking at that interview. And we are predicting something, like one of the things we're predicting is called reflective functioning. So the babies who are more less able to follow the turn-taking rhythms of the mother and the stranger, the novel partner, at 4 and 12 months, those babies, once they're adults, have lower levels of reflective functioning, lower levels of ability to reflect on their experience and think about it and put it into words and to value it. So that's a fascinating finding.
So in other words, to be able to kind of reflect, for example, on mistakes you'd made, things you were trying to get better at.
Yeah.
Like, is that what you mean?
Well, that interview asks you about your experience with your parents. It asks you to describe, give us 5 adjectives that describe your mother. So the person gives those 5 adjectives. And then you go back and say, now give me a few really concrete examples of that adjective. What happened? What illustrates for you that adjective? My mother was playful. So give me a few examples of that. Or my father was angry. Give me a few examples of that. And so then they have to sort of think about, well, what was it? You know, what about that experience? What was it that I felt that she was playful? Or what about that experience really did I think was angry? And why did I think they were like that? Why was my father angry in that way?
So the babies who were sort of less adept at the turn taking,
less able to follow the rhythm,
were then 30 years later were less able to be kind of reflective about their experience.
That's right.
So what? What is it about being reflective that is thought to be useful in terms of being a successful functioning person in your life?
So more ability to function, more ability to reflect on your experience is very valuable because it is associated with the more secure patterns of attachment. More secure patterns of attachment are associated with less likelihood of divorce, more likelihood that you will yourself have a secure baby, less use of the medical system, more friends, more general life satisfaction. So ability to reflect on your experience is a powerful resource in a good adaptation in development in adulthood.
Because of the substantial body of work done over these past decades by you and hundreds of other researchers, I think both the general public and policymakers are beginning to understand that this period of life, that infancy, is more important than we'd realized.
That's right.
It's just beginning. What is it that you think research is telling us that's most important for policymakers to understand and keep in mind when they're thinking about social policy?
I think we as a culture need to change our idea of babies. We need to understand that babies are already little people. They're already emotional human beings, very sensitive, very aware, and can be hurt as well as can be, really nurtured. And they need what you and I need. They need a really sensitive, empathic, communicative, emotional partner. And the nature of the partnering, whether it's from the parent or if they spend 10 hours in daycare, the nature of the partnering from the daycare worker or the nanny, whoever is the partner, the nature of that relatedness is going to affect the baby's development.
Dr. Beebe, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for taking the time to come share your amazing work with us.
Thank you for inviting me, Katharine. It was really a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, that's the end of our discussion with Dr. Beatrice Beebe. Thanks for watching. As always, let us know what other topics you'd like AAI scholars to cover on Viewpoint, and to learn more about early childhood development, check the links in the description below.